Hey guys, today we're going to look at a truly interesting part of processor history in examining the Athlon FX 57 processor, which debuted for $1,031 in June of 2005, and how in just 4 years, 11 months, it had morphed into the bargain bin Sempron 145, of which I still have one new in the box. Now, this particular processor has always fascinated me because processor development seems to have slowed in recent years, especially on Intel's front. But only 10 years ago, it was still skyrocketing to new heights year after year. One such case was definitely the Athlon FX 57, which according to an Anantech article, which you can easily Google, was the fastest single-core CPU as of June 27, 2005. Fast forward to May of 2010, and the Sempron 145 is a forgettable and yet more efficient, even slightly faster version of the same thing. Believe it or not, I bought this CPU personally as a backup on the AM3 platforms I sold at the time. I never ended up using it, so I never opened it. I never plan to now. It's the only new in-box CPU I have, and it is unique in both what it is and what it represented technologically only about 12 years ago. Let me show you the back label there and the sticker so you can see that it is actually sealed in the box. Pretty neat. Well, needless to say, I just need to tell you, I don't actually own an Athlon FX 57 itself. But believe it or not, they are still selling for nearly $100 on eBay. Go ahead and look it up. That's fascinating. Whereas you can get this CPU for about $10 out of the box. Basically, they are the same CPU, but the name of the legendary FX series, that is before the bulldozer garbage, it still carries the weight with the nostalgic crowd to this day. Well, for fun, let's dive into the technical specs. Both of these CPUs are 2.8 gigahertz single-core processors. I'll go ahead and show you the top label here again so you can kind of see that there. And they're built on the same basic architecture, but they do plug into different sockets. The FX CPU plugged into socket AM2, whereas the Sempron plugs into socket AM3. Yet in many cases, these are cross-compatible platforms. They both have 1 megabyte of L2 cache, which you can also see on the label, 128 kilobytes of L1 cache, and the ability to support 64-bit operating systems. One advantage the Sempron has is the ability to use DDR2 or DDR3 memory, whereas the FX was limited to DDR400. This likely accounts for most of the Sempron's performance gain during that time, albeit as small as it is. The Sempron 145 actually gained a little bit in its 5-year journey to becoming from what it was in its FX sides to what it became. The Sempron 145 is only a 45-watt processor in comparison to the FX, which was 104 watts. The Sempron uses a 45-nanometer process, whereas the FX used a 90-nanometer process. There are also some slight architectural improvements from that core's development over that time. The Athlon 64FX57 represented the peak of power at its time. That's hard to believe, but back in 2005, the vast majority of games and applications were single-threaded only, so it was able to competently compete with dual cores at the time, even if it did lose a little bit here and there. I was in the 4th year of my business at the time. That was the same year that my firstborn son was born, so I remember this time well, and how single-threaded processors of this architecture truly were king. Nonetheless, this CPU's day was numbered, and those who opted for slower dual cores for significantly less money would actually see their payoff as time went on, and software was optimized for more cores. Those older dual cores to this day are still often usable even if they are slow, whereas single cores, no matter how fast they are, typically just don't run well at all, if at all. And nowadays, of course, we would never even consider buying a single-core CPU. Hardly even really a dual-core if we do serious work beyond word processing and email. Some of Intel's Core i3s that are dual-core are still pretty good, but nonetheless, Quad-core CPUs are becoming the norm, and even more cores beyond that. The single core truly becomes part of history, and with it the Athlon FX 57 and this little Sempron 145. It is the story of a truly top-end CPU that introduced at $1,031 and became virtually negligible in less than 5 years. We may complain at the slow rate of CPU development today in comparison to days past, but at least our expensive hardware does live in the present ecosystem quite a bit longer as a result. If you bought a mid-range $150 CPU back in 2012, there's still a good chance it performs decently today. Back in the days of the Athlon FX to the Sempron 145, though, it was a very different story. Alright, sorry for the interruption there. Just some final thoughts. I googled a comparison of the Athlon FX 57 to the Sempron 145 at CPU-world.com, CPUboss.com, and GameDebate.com, and all but GameDebate.com gives the Sempron 145 the edge as the slightly superior CPU, and GameDebate only reverses that because it mistakenly lists the Sempron 145 as having half of the L1 cache. So basically, this is all easy to find information that you can do if you find this comparison as interesting as I have. Finally, Google AnandTech Athlon 64 FX 57 if you want to read that article that I referred to earlier. The Athlon FX 57 scorched the Intel competition in its day, including all of the Extreme Edition Pentium 4 CPUs, Intel's own 3.3 GHz Pentium 4 670 that had nearly a 1 GHz clock speed advantage, twice as much L2 cache, and hyperthreading. In Doom 3, for example, there was a 15% increase in frames per second when using the Athlon FX 57 over any of Intel's available chips at the time. The FX was untouchable, but within just a very short 5 years, it was a bargain bin green box labeled Sempron 145, while the Pentium 4 brand was completely dead. By 2010, it was AMD Phenom 2s competing with Intel Core 2 Duos and Core 2 Quads, leaving all of the above far behind. It's interesting when you look at CPUs from 5 years ago today. If you had a Sandy Bridge or an Ivy Bridge Core i3 or Core i5, you could still run most modern graphics cards and be fine. Not a lot has changed in the last 5 years, but what has changed in the last 10 to 12 years is truly phenomenal. Well, this was a fun video to research and record, and I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane once again. Have a good one.